Hi, my name is Zoe Elise Thomas, and today I am going to be presenting on Demeter and motherhood in modern receptions of Hades and Persephone, focusing in particular on modern romance literature and one common narrative trend in these reception pieces. Please be advised that this talk will be discussing themes of sexual assault, incest, and parent-child abuse. Despite the references to the violent and non-consensual nature of Persephone's abduction to the underworld in ancient texts, such as the Homeric hymn to Demeter, which I have up on the slide, many modern depictions of the story of Hades and Persephone transform the kidnapping into a more benign love story, even though most of these modern authors and artists working in this genre cite the Homeric hymn to Demeter in particular, but ancient evidence at large as their sources. For example, Lore Olympus on the left, a popular webcomic by Rachel Smythe, even starts with a quote from the Loeb edition of the Homeric hymn to Demeter. And Punderworld by Lisa Sejic on the right cites the Homeric hymn to Demeter as her inspiration for the creation of her webcomic Punderworld. And you can see this squared off in blue. However, the non-consensual nature of the myth poses a problem for modern audiences, for whom explicit sexual assault is usually considered antithetical to romantic love. Reception authors prefer instead to render Hades blameless in their reimagining of the narrative, or if not blameless, then otherwise flawed, a loner, excessively grumpy, mean, or difficult, but no longer a perpetrator of sexual assault. This sanitization poses a narrative issue because it removes the catalyst that forces Persephone away from her mother, Demeter, and into the underworld. This paper explores one common narrative method, which is used to replace the impetus for Persephone's descent, the reassigning of blame from Hades to Demeter. By conducting a survey of 4 modern receptions of the myth, Lore Olympus by Rachel Smythe, Punderworld by Linda Sejic, Neon Gods by Katie Roberts, and The Dark Wife by Sarah Deemer, I will show how Demeter gets typecast as a bad mother from whom Persephone feels the need to escape, thereby creating the scenario which results in Persephone's kidnapping or quote-unquote kidnapping. Sometimes Persephone's sexual assault is transferred to another character. So for example, in Lore Olympus, Persephone is raped by Apollo, whereas in The Dark Wife, Persephone watches someone else be raped. But ultimately, the blame for Persephone's descent into the underworld is laid at the feet of Demeter because of her behavior as a mother. Because these pieces of literature may be unfamiliar to some of you, I want to start with a brief introduction to each one, including the general way that the characters of Hades, Persephone, and Demeter are presented. First is the popular webcomic and now published graphic novel, Lore Olympus. Originally started in March 2018, it transfers the story of Hades and Persephone into a modern urban setting, complete with smartphones, tablets, and shiny corporations. Hades is portrayed as an awkward loner and is described in one review as the, quote, ultimate sensitive emo guy. He is attentive to Persephone's needs, careful with his behavior, and he's one of the few gods that doesn't scheme in Lore Olympus. Persephone is depicted as being naive and warm-hearted, a newcomer to urban Olympian life who just wants to do good. In contrast, Demeter is depicted as being an overbearing and overprotective parent who controls Persephone's lifestyle and life choices and is obsessed with work. And on the screen, you can see 3 different shots of the various characters. On the left, we have Demeter and Demeter arguing with Hades. And on the right, we have Persephone at the top and Hades at the bottom. My second source is the webcomic turned graphic novel Punderworld by Lisa Sejic. The webcomic was started in October 2019 and retells the story of Hades and Persephone in an ancient setting. Hades is the, quote, officious antisocial ruler of the underworld, according to the back piece of the graphic novel, who is beset by paperwork and an awkward loner. Persephone is portrayed as being a spunky go-getter who has been crushing on Hades for 200 years. Demeter, meanwhile, is depicted as an overprotective parent who controls Persephone's lifestyle and life choices and is obsessed with work. You may be picking up on a theme here that will continue throughout the rest of the presentation. As you can see here on the left, Persephone looking at Hades, and then on the bottom right, Demeter admitting perhaps to some wrongdoing in a conversation with Persephone. The next book used is Neon Gods by Katie Robert. It is a romance novel published in 2021 that places Hades and Persephone in a modern urban setting. Interestingly, the gods aren't divinities so much as titles that pass down between generations. However, much of the original characterization from Greek myth is still retained. So for example, Demeter is in charge of food infrastructure in the city, and Hades rules the lower city. Hades is portrayed as an inappropriately maligned loner who hates Zeus and wants revenge against him, while also being gentle and protective towards Persephone, who escapes Zeus's clutches and her mother's political machinations by running away to the lower city. Persephone, too, is mistreated and powerless and is subject to the whims of her mother, who is portrayed as a scheming politician who uses Persephone to achieve her own career and political ends. And our final source is The Dark Wife by Sarah Deemer, a young adult romance novel published in 2011. It reimagines the story of Hades and Persephone as a lesbian romance in an ancient setting, where Hades is a gentle, protective, and inappropriately maligned loner who is mocked by the gods for not being as ruthless as they are. She's called a lord instead of a lady as a way to mock her and strip her of her identity, something she bears with quiet dignity. Persephone is a young, mistreated, and angry woman. And contrary to the three previous pieces, Demeter in The Dark Wife is portrayed not as a power-hungry, controlling career woman, but as a woman who has been so abused that she is incapable of protecting Persephone, who cannot adequately support or provide for her own daughter when she needs it. I want to pull back from these reception pieces briefly and talk instead about what makes a bad mother in the modern Western mind, so that we can return to Demeter in just a few moments and reassess how her behavior reflects modern ideologies. In a 2006 study of modern mothering ideologies, Johnston and Swanson conducted a survey of non-working, part-time working, and full-time working mothers to look for trends regarding their perception of themselves as mothers and as workers. These ideologies, Johnston and Swanson argue, quote, promote a particular construction of reality, and that we conceive as being and what we conceive as being a good or bad approach to mothering is a socially defined phenomenon. It is also worth noting that most popular conceptions of good and bad mothering are rooted in a white heterosexual context with an emphasis on the nuclear family, and are typically dismissive of mothering ideologies from minority groups, which differ from the mainstream mothering ideology. One example of this is communal mothering. The most mainstream mothering ideology is that of intensive mothering, which is a child-centered approach to motherhood. Mothers are considered to be primarily responsible for the nurturing and development of their child, and they are expected to have their child's needs take precedence over their own. Intensive mothering leaves little place for a mother to have an identity other than mother, and the other aspects of their personhood, career interests, their hobbies, even their emotions, are expected to be placed second to the needs and desires of their child. One mother interviewed by Johnston and Swanson, when asked how they define the ideal good mother and how they themselves are a good mother, said, quote, I'm good at putting my kids first. I'm good at hiding my frustration and stress level. I don't put my needs in front of theirs. That makes me a good mom. Conversely, full-time working mothers feel like they struggle to be good mothers, and they feel guilty when they do not prioritize their children over their own needs and interests. Turning back to Hades and Persephone and Demeter, Demeter's character in these adaptations of the myth fall broadly into the trope of the beloved smother, a mother who is so invested in their child's well-being that they refuse to let their child act on their own accord, even after that child has reached adulthood. In Demeter's case, this manifests in 4 ways. First, Demeter is hyper-controlling of Persephone's actions, social life, and sex life. And second, Demeter refuses to accept Persephone as an adult capable of making her own decisions. Both of these tropes feature in Lore Olympus, Punderworld, and Neon Gods. Third, we have Demeter projecting her own personal and career ambitions onto Persephone. And fourth, that Demeter is obsessed with her work and thinks that Persephone should be too. And numbers 3 and 4 feature in all 4 pieces of literature surveyed today. Each of these tropes about Demeter's behavior violate the concept of the ideal mother who lays aside everything in order to support their child, as each of these tropes instead shift the mother-daughter relationship to be about Demeter's experiences and emotions and desires instead of Persephone's. And in each of these 4 stories, Demeter's behavior is so extreme as to be emotionally abusive and manipulative towards Persephone. And in each story, it is Demeter's abuse of Persephone or neglect that somehow results in the harms which Persephone experiences that then result in Hades saving Persephone. In Lore Olympus, Demeter's control over Persephone's social and sex life is so complete that she doesn't allow her adult child to have a cell phone and only allows her to create an email account in order to enroll in university. Demeter's control over Persephone is also noted by other characters in the webcomic, such as when Artemis, the purple character in these panels, calls Demeter, quote, such a fucking helicopter. This happens after Artemis gives Persephone an old broken phone so that Persephone can have one. And Persephone is so touched by this that she starts crying. Demeter is also the primary driver behind Persephone's pursuit of being inducted into the Eternal Maidens, a group which in turn provides Persephone's college tuition, but forces Persephone to abstain from sex, despite that not being what Persephone wants. You can see Demeter on the lower left there saying, doesn't it sound like fun? Ultimately, Demeter's attitude towards Persephone is so abusive that Persephone has nightmares about her mother locking her in a greenhouse with no doors, where Demeter takes on a monstrous form outside the windows, claiming that it's for the best because no one can hurt her inside the greenhouse. While Persephone cries, quote, don't make me stay in here. I promise to be good. One of the major results of Demeter's abuse towards Persephone is that after Persephone is raped by Apollo, she refuses to contact Demeter to ask for help, saying, quote, you'll make her more worried than she needs to be. Persephone's isolation after the rape is what draws her closer to Hades, and ultimately it is Hades who works with Persephone through the trauma of her experience because she is too afraid to go to Demeter. So rather than it being Hades kidnapping Persephone and taking her to the underworld, the story is one where Persephone, alienated from her mother because of Demeter's emotional abuse, flees to the underworld to escape the trauma of her rape. Demeter in Punderworld is similarly controlling of Persephone's social and sex life. When Demeter catches Persephone daydreaming about Hades, Demeter grows irate and accuses her of seeing someone without telling Demeter. And she starts a huge fight with Persephone about her behavior. And this talk is not about the art, but I think it's worth pointing out that Demeter's character, actually, the level of her anger is represented by the text, the speech bubbles. They both change color and turn this fiery color, and they change shape, just to really emphasize how upset Demeter is with this turn of events. Later, in a flashback to when Persephone and Hades met 200 years before, Demeter actually lies to Persephone about who Hades is in an effort to keep Persephone away from the other gods and to control who Persephone talks to. And this happens after Demeter catches Persephone and Hades chatting, and Demeter kicks Hades out of their house. Demeter's control over Persephone stems from her extreme dedication to their work, which she refuses to put aside despite Persephone's multiple requests to do so. The only way Persephone can think to entice Demeter into attending an Olympian party is by trying to convince her that their attendance is, quote, work-related. And even then, Demeter refuses to attend, arguing that they only need mortal approval for their work and not divine approval. Demeter's gaslighting of Persephone and ultimate denial of Persephone's requests is what results in Persephone fleeing from her mother. She escapes into a glade and discovers Hades' chariot, and then accidentally sets the horses to flight, and not knowing how to fly the chariot, almost crashes. Hades swoops in to help Persephone, saving them both from a chariot wreck and careening them into the underworld below. In this adaptation of Hades' kidnapping of Persephone, it is once again framed as the fault of Demeter for alienating Persephone with her emotional abuse. In Neon Gods, Demeter's behavior is even more abusive towards Persephone. Demeter, a high-powered politician in charge of feeding the entire city of Olympus, constantly uses Persephone for political and career gains. When Persephone requests to leave an Olympian party because of a headache, Demeter refuses to let her go because Zeus, the head of the upper city of Olympus, a rumored murderer and the most powerful politician, wants to speak to Persephone. It turns out that in a bid for more political power, Demeter has arranged to marry Persephone off to Zeus, despite the fact that he's rumored to have murdered his 3 previous wives. In one attempt to distance herself from Zeus, Persephone says, quote, "You know he's rumored to have killed all 3 of his wives." And in response, Demeter quips, quote, "It's certainly less messy than a divorce." When Persephone tries to push back against Demeter's flippant response, her mother shoots her down, saying, quote, "Oh, relax, I know best." The oncoming engagement to Zeus is what causes Persephone to flee to the lower city ruled by Hades, who saves Persephone from Zeus's soldiers who attempt to force Persephone to stay in the upper city to marry him. After saving Persephone, it is Hades who does the most to protect her from Zeus. He plans with her to help her escape Zeus's clutches. And it isn't until the end of the book that Demeter reveals that she herself was actually planning on killing Zeus after Persephone married him in order to steal his position and power, a plan that Persephone was never made aware of. And finally, in The Dark Wife, as mentioned before, it has a little bit of a different conception of Demeter, but one that still aligns with a bad mother by the standards of intensive mothering and modern mothering ideologies. Demeter does project her own desires onto Persephone, and in the first chapter, she grooms Persephone into agreeing that Persephone, will someday become, quote, queen of all the gods. However, Demeter's character is less directly abusive than her counterparts in Lore Olympus, Punderworld, and Neon Gods. Rather, Demeter herself has been sexually and emotionally abused by Zeus to the point where Demeter cannot physically protect Persephone. Zeus rapes Persephone's first girlfriend, Charis, and later, when Persephone confronts Demeter for not stopping it, Demeter says, quote, "Zeus gets what he wants." Persephone then asks if Demeter would have stopped Zeus if he had been raping Persephone, to which Demeter says, quote, "He wouldn't do anything like that to one of his daughters, I don't think." The takeaway from this passage, as summarized by Persephone a few lines later, is that Demeter wouldn't step in to save Persephone, even if Zeus had assaulted his own daughter. Persephone's response to this is to rebel against her mother and Olympus, and it is Lady Hades who offers to help Persephone in this endeavor, protecting Persephone from Zeus in the underworld and giving her a home until she decides what to do after running away from Demeter. It would be impossible to survey all the modern receptions of Hades and Persephone in romance literature in a paper of this length. There are quite literally hundreds of adaptations of the Hades and Persephone myth. And while some navigate the sanitization of the original myth differently, the Demeter as bad mother theme is so prevalent that it is considered a given, quote unquote, a given for these adaptations on the popular media tropes website TV Tropes. While romance literature is frequently disregarded as a literary genre, romance novels have demonstrably a huge impact on the way that their audiences perceive love, sex, and personal relationships, both familial and romantic. The vilification of Demeter as a work-obsessed and controlling and abusive mother in modern adaptations, therefore, continues to uphold the persistent mainstream mothering ideology, which places a woman's career and personal interests in direct opposition to her role as a mother. So even though each of these adaptations feature a strong female character and a robust, heartwarming, and sensitive romance, both of which the modern reader loves to see, the reliance and indeed over-reliance on the narrative trope of Demeter as the, quote, beloved smother runs the risk of doing harm too, by further stigmatizing working mothers and mothers who don't conform to the expected mothering ideal of intensive mothering. As with all cases of reception, it is worthwhile to consider what modern ideologies are being supported and upheld by the selection and adaptation of ancient media, and whether those popular ideologies are worth being supported at all. Thank you so much for your attention, and I really look forward to hearing what y'all have to say in the discussion panel. Have a great day.